Hey guys, Jim again from IAG and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're out in the shop installing this version 3 air oil separator on a 2018 Subaru STI. But before we get started, how about we take a look at what's inside the box. So first thing we're going to do is open the box. We'll do that with a razor blade or a pair of scissors. Remove the can from the box with the two coolant lines attached and do a visual inspection to make sure everything looks right. Looks good. Next, we're going to remove all the hoses and hardware and do a quick inventory to make sure we have everything we need. Looks like we have everything we need for our install, but be sure to reference our inventory spreadsheet found on page 2 of our written instructions. In front of me is a list of tools you might need to do the job. 1/4-inch ratchet, 10mm socket, 8mm socket, 1/4-inch extension, 3/8-inch ratchet, 3/8-inch extension, 12mm 3/8 socket, tape measure, 10mm wrench, a pocket screwdriver, 90-degree pick, an array of pliers, including hose clamp pliers and lengthened needle nose pliers, a pair of cutters, hose pliers, hose cutters, and a torque wrench. If you're in need of any of these tools, be sure to click the link in the description below. The first step in working on any vehicle is to make sure you disconnect the negative terminal on your battery. Next, we're going to remove the two 12mm bolts attaching the blow-off valve to the intercooler. Be sure to keep a close eye on your blow-off valve gasket because it will be reused in this installation. Next, remove the two 12mm bolts attaching the crossover pipe to the intercooler. Now we can remove the two 12mm bolts attaching the intercooler to the brackets. Remove the two 12mm bolts for the driver's side intercooler bracket. Remove this bracket. Next, we're going to loosen the clamps on the throttle body and the turbo outlet. This can be done with either an 8mm socket or a flathead screwdriver. Now it's time to remove the intercooler. Do this by pushing the core back towards the firewall and lifting up on the driver's side. Next, we'll be disconnecting 4 PCV connectors, starting on the driver's side in this location. Then, on the passenger side, finally, on the front center of the engine. Then remove the crossover pipe. Then we're going to remove all 3 PCV connectors from the pipe, including both white connectors and the single black connector. The connectors can be removed in one of 2 ways, either pulling it or cutting the clamps. Next, we'll reconnect the black PCV plug on the driver's side. Then reinstall the harness. Then we'll rotate the entire connector until the electrical plug is facing down. Then we'll reinstall both white PCV plugs in the front of the engine and the passenger side. Now we'll be partially removing the throttle body by removing the 4 10mm bolts attaching it to the intake manifold. Then we'll move the throttle body slightly out of the way. Just like the blow-off valve, keep a good eye on your throttle body gasket because this will also be reused in the installation of our air oil separator. Locate the PCV valve nipple underneath the throttle body. Remove the clamp. Then remove the PCV line. You can do this by hand, but we found it easiest to use a pair of needle nose pliers. Now remove the PCV connector in this location. With a pick, dislodge the clamp attaching the PCV assembly to the block. You can now remove the entire assembly by pulling up on these two hoses. Be sure to remove the lower clamp. It's time to remove the white PCV connector from this assembly. Reinstall this plug back into its connector. Locate the supplied 2-inch breather hose and Y fitting with spring clamps. Remove the zip ties from this 2-inch hose. With a dab of lubricant, install this Y pipe into the hose. Install both supplied clamps at this time. Use another dab of lubricant inside the opened end of this hose. Now install the hose and Y pipe onto the fitting on top of the block. This can take a little bit of effort, so be patient. With a set of pliers, remove the O2 sensor from its bracket. With a small pocket screwdriver, lift up the tab, releasing the main engine harness from the bracket. Using a razor blade, remove the small amount of electrical tape that's behind the connector of the O2 sensor harness. With a pair of pliers, release this harness tie from the intercooler bracket. Remove the one 10mm bolt attaching the wiring harness bracket to the strut tower. Use a razor blade to carefully remove the electrical tape from the engine harness in this location. This will help relieve a little bit of tension on the harness once we install the air oil separator can. Now the fun begins. Take another look at the can. There are two coolant hoses that come pre-assembled. These banjo fittings are designed to swivel and come pre-torqued before it arrives to you, so there is no need to tighten these fittings. Now locate the 1/2 inch by 26 inch long drain hose. Pre-install a 1/2 inch clamp about 2 inches down. Install the hose onto the drain fitting located on the bottom of the can. Apply the clamp. Now we can attach the mounting bracket to the can using the 3 Allen head bolts provided. Torque these 3 bolts using your 5mm Allen head socket to 7 foot-pounds. As you can see, the can has many different bolt holes for an array of applications. We found on the VA chassis Subarus, this location works best. The can bracket is mounted on this hole and this hole located on the strut tower. It's good practice to run a bolt into these holes prior to installing the can. This helps clear any debris from the hole and greatly decreases the chance of any cross-threading. Now it's time to install the can. As we do this, we'll take our 2 coolant lines and run them underneath the main harness, while keeping them above our intercooler bracket. Insert the 2 10mm bolts, starting by hand. You can now secure these bolts with your 10mm wrench. Locate the supplied harness bracket and install in this orientation. Remove the 10mm bolt located here. With that bolt, attach the new harness bracket in the same location. Reattach your O2 sensor to its original bracket. It's time to attach your cooling hoses from the can to your vehicle's cooling system. We'll start by removing these two clamps. Okay guys, stop right there. It's always good practice to make sure your hoses are cooled to the touch and to relieve any excess coolant pressure off of your system before removing any coolant hoses. Now that we know the system is safe to work around, we'll use a pair of pliers to agitate the hose for easier removal. Before we remove the hose, I like to eye up the position and cut the hose to length to help minimize mess. Pre-install your supplied coolant clamps. Now we'll remove the coolant hose while simultaneously installing the hose from the can, starting at the expansion tank. Install the clamp. Do the same for the lower portion of the hose. Install the clamp. Now use one of the supplied zip ties to secure the coolant lines away from any obstructions. Cut the excess from the zip tie. Next, locate the 3/8" PCV hose. As you'll notice, the valve located in this hose is not center, it is offset, which means the longer piece of the hose will go to the intake manifold, while the shorter side of the hose will be at the can. Once again, the short side of the hose attaches to the can. Attach the clamp. The long end of the hose will attach to the intake nipple. When installing this hose, install it underneath the blow-off valve recirc hose as shown. Install the clamp. Now we can reinstall the throttle body, reusing the OEM gasket and hardware. Torque the throttle body bolts to 6 foot-pounds. Next we're going to run our drain line. First we're going to take our 12" piece of heat sheathing and apply it to the hose. Slide the piece of heat sheathing onto the drain hose. Proper installation of the drain hose might be the most important step in this entire process. Now, if you pay attention to the paper instructions on our website, it will tell you to run the drain hose through this hole to your Y. But I find that difficult to get the stock top mount back onto the car in that application. We're going to do something a little different. First thing, we're going to rotate our Y fitting so that the bottom port is facing the pitch stop mount. Then we'll pull our transmission vent out of its bracket and out of the way for the moment. Run the drain hose parallel to the pitch stop mount and cut to length. Pre-install a 1/2 inch clamp onto the hose. Then install the hose to the bottom port of the Y. Now install the clamp. We can couple our PCV hose and our drain hose underneath the transmission vent when reinstalling into its bracket. Now secure the drain hose to the AC line using a supplied zip tie. Cut the tail. For proper installation and function of the air oil separator, the drain line must never go above the drain port on the bottom of the can. Locate the 5/8 inch hose. We need to make a modification to this hose that might change depending on the modifications to your car. With a stock turbo, measure about 3 inches from one end of the hose and cut. With a dash of lube, apply to one side of the 5/8 inch 90-degree fitting. Then install the short end of the hose. Pre-install 2 of the 5/8 inch clamps. Lube the other end of your 5/8 inch 90 and install the long portion of the hose. Install an additional 5/8 inch clamp. Install one of the 2 provided 16 inch long heat sheathings onto this hose. Finally, pre-install your last 5/8 inch clamp. Take the long portion of this hose and slide it underneath your intercooler bracket. Install the short part of the hose onto the top of the Y. Once we're at the can, we'll measure for length and cut the hose. The hose will be going to the bottommost side port on the can. Then install the clamp. Now locate the 74 inch hose. It's the longest hose inside the box. Pre-install a clamp on one end of this hose. Install this hose on our driver's side PCV connector. Install the clamp. Run the open end of this hose behind the PCV line. Measure this hose to length and cut. We're installing this hose on the topmost side port of the can. Pre-install a 1/2 inch clamp. Install the hose onto the can and secure the clamp. You can secure the vent hose to the padded portion of the AC line shown here. Secure with a zip tie and cut the tail. With the remainder of this hose, we'll be installing on the passenger side of our PCV system. But first, let's pre-install the clamp. We can now install the last piece of our 16 inch heat sheathing onto this hose. With the clamp side of this hose in hand, install it onto the passenger side PCV connector. Then install the clamp. Run the remaining end of this hose underneath the intercooler bracket. Measure this hose to length and then cut. Pre-install the clamp, then install the hose onto the center port of the can. Then install the clamp. Secure these 2 hoses together with a zip tie. Cut the tail. Now locate the 44 inch long 1/2 inch hose. Measure 2 inches from one side of the hose and cut. Apply lube to both sides of a 1/2 inch 90-degree fitting. Install the short end of the hose and then the remaining long end of the hose. Pre-install 3 of the 1/2 inch clamps. Install the short end of this hose onto the front PCV valve connector. Install the clamp. Take the long end of this hose and run it underneath our coolant line. We will be attaching this hose to the top left breather port on the can. Measure to length and cut. Install our clamp, then install the line and apply that clamp. With the remainder of our 44-inch long hose, cut a 2-inch section off of one side. Just like our previous 1/2 inch 90, lubricate both ends, then install the short and long end of the hose. Pre-install all 3 clamps. With the short end of this hose, install it onto the remaining white PCV connector in this location. Install your clamp. Run the remainder of this hose underneath the coolant line alongside our other vent. With this hose measured and cut to length, pre-install a 1/2 inch clamp. Install this hose onto the top right breather port of our can, and then install the clamp. All of your hoses are now connected. Be sure to check for any obstructions that may damage any of your air oil separator hosing. With both clamps loosely placed on our throttle body coupler, we'll install that first. Pay close attention to how I install this intercooler. I raise the driver's side of the intercooler high while dropping the passenger side of the intercooler low. Pass the throttle body coupler and then down into place. Now you can use your 90-degree pick to work around the bottom side of your turbo outlet. With the coupler now fully around the outlet, adjust the intercooler until it sits flush onto the turbo. I found it easiest to use an 8mm socket on a long 1/4 inch extension to access the clamp on the turbo outlet. Now with the turbo outlet clamp tight, we can tighten the top clamp on our throttle body coupler. Now you can install your driver's side intercooler bracket. Tighten the 3 12mm intercooler bracket bolts. Reinstall the brake booster line into the clip. Starting by hand, install your passenger side intercooler bracket bolt as well as our 2 blow-off valve bolts. Keep in mind we're reusing the factory gasket. Be sure to tighten. With the intercooler now secured, we can reattach the negative terminal to our battery. That completes the install of our air oil separator on this 2018 Subaru STI. But before we hit the road, we're going to start the car, check for leaks, and bleed the system if necessary. To bleed the system properly, we first must start the car. Once you start the car, immediately check for leaks. If the car is leak-free, take a 1/8 inch socket to the back of the can onto our bleeder screw and partially remove this screw until coolant starts to come out with no aeration. Once there's no more air in the system, close and tighten the valve. Be sure to keep a close eye on coolant temperatures while performing this procedure. Now you can shut the car off. Now remove the coolant cap and add any additional coolant as needed. Now that the cooling system is bled and we've checked for leaks, it's time to hit the road and have some fun. If you enjoyed this video and are looking for more content just like this, be sure to hit that like and subscribe to be the first to know about new videos. Thanks again, catch you in the next one.